And joining us from New York is the author of the book that is being shopped around the White House, Gordon Goldstein, the author of Lessons in Disaster. Mr. Goldstein, what is your book about, and what would you like the White House to take away from this book?
My book is about the reflections of the former National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy, who in the last 2 years of his life looked back on his role in policymaking in Vietnam and tried to draw some of the critical lessons of what he experienced and his counsel to the two presidents. He served President Kennedy and President Johnson. Bundy was a passionate advocate of the war in Vietnam during his time in power, and in retrospect, he concluded that the war could not be won and should not have been fought. And our collaboration together focused on his effort to understand how we got so dangerously off track in Vietnam and how those lessons could be applied to future generations. As Bundy said, I had a part in a great failure. If I've learned anything, I should try to share that with others. And that is why I believe the lessons of Vietnam are now resonant, and why some in the White House and in the Defense Department are now trying to grasp the essence of that as they chart their way forward in Afghanistan.
And what would you like them to take away from your book?
I think there are two lessons that are critically important. One relates to President Kennedy in 1961, and the other relates to Lyndon Johnson in 1965. In 1961, Kennedy was facing the first proposal to send in an escalated number of forces into South Vietnam. In fact, it was the first proposal to send in ground combat forces into South Vietnam. He was told that he had to make a down payment on a ground force commitment that could grow up to 6 divisions or more than 200,000 men. Kennedy was, in essence, encircled by all of his senior advisors, his Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State, Bundy, his generals on the ground, the Joint Chiefs, all joined together in promoting this proposal to send in the first ground combat forces. Kennedy, however, was deeply skeptical that that commitment would be successful. He was deeply skeptical that we could prevail in a war of that nature in Vietnam. He told one of his aides, Mike Forrestal, that the odds were 100 to 1 against the United States prevailing in South Vietnam. So he held his ground. He acted on the courage of his convictions, which was based on his own rigorous analysis of the challenge in South Vietnam, and he denied their request. And the lesson there is that counselors advise, but presidents decide. And one lesson for this president, who in his first year is being faced with a comparable proposal to escalate in a dangerous foreign conflict, is that he has to come to his own conclusion about whether the strategy proposed to him is a viable one, and if he does not have very strong level of confidence that it will be successful, he has to act on the basis of his conviction as well.
Mr. Goldstein, we sat down with the former Defense Secretary, Robert McNamara, in 1995 for book notes when he wrote his book about his memoir about Vietnam. Here's what he had to say at that time.
We believed that Vietnam, as Eisenhower said in 1954, was a domino. And if the Soviets and the Chinese controlled it, the rest of Southeast Asia would fall. Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Thailand, Indochina, and maybe India, and that the communist strength would be so increased that Western Europe would be endangered. Now that's what we thought. We were totally wrong, but that's what motivated us. That's why we acted as we did.
Mr. Goldstein, take a look, react to that, those comments by Robert McNamara and what McGeorge Bundy told you when you were working on this book.
Well, let me explain for the benefit of your viewers how significant that book by Robert McNamara was for McGeorge Bundy's decision to write about Vietnam. They were very close friends and colleagues who had a great deal of mutual respect for one another. And when Bob McNamara wrote his book, he came under enormous criticism for it, yet spoke out, decided that he had to grapple with these issues. And despite the fire he came under, Bundy decided that he too would have to engage in his own retrospective study of Vietnam. So it was in direct response to McNamara that Bundy went down this path and came to many of the same conclusions that McNamara came to. There was at the time an overwhelming preoccupation with the Cold War, with the threat posed by global communism, and that was more than any other factor the animating, propulsive focus of decision-making about Vietnam. There was a belief, Bundy held it very passionately, that if the United States did not preserve its credibility by taking a firm stand in South Vietnam, by holding to its commitments there, that its credibility in the larger context of the Cold War, the larger competition with the Soviet Union, that we would be in great danger. He retrospectively concluded that that conviction was wrong. We believed in the domino theory. The greatest domino in South Vietnam fell the other way. I'm referring to Indonesia in 1965. Regionally, that was the great test case for the domino theory. And none of those assumptions held. Yet we barreled ahead in Vietnam, and we doubled down on that commitment there. And it was a commitment that Bundy retrospectively concluded we should not have made.
And Mr. Goldstein, do you see parallels with the debate going on today in Washington over Afghanistan?
I think there are a number of very strong parallels. One of them goes back again to Kennedy in 1961. At the time, Kennedy sent a delegation to South Vietnam to review the military situation there and to come back with proposals. It was a delegation led by one of his top generals, Max Taylor, and the early reports coming from South Vietnam were leaked to the press. There were leaks suggesting that there was going to be a proposal for ground combat troop deployments and that the president was inclined to accept them. This infuriated Kennedy. He hated the notion of being boxed in by one of his generals. And he, in turn, orchestrated his own leaks suggesting that that was not going to be the case. And then he had a showdown with his advisors in the autumn of 1961 where they were reevaluating the basic strategy in South Vietnam. I think a direct parallel is occurring right now in Washington. General McChrystal has advocated an increase of up to 40,000 troops in Afghanistan. Someone close to General McChrystal has leaked his recommendation to Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. It was reported some weeks ago. The White House, days later, reported that the president was going to suspend the deliberation on that troop number and reinitiate a debate about the strategy. And we have seen the leak and counter-leak. And again, we see an example of a young president facing one of his first crises, in essence squaring off against one of his generals who clearly has a very strong view and is trying to influence the outcome, it appears, of a decision that the president is now grappling with.
All right, Mr. Goldstein, we have viewers waiting to talk to you as well on this. Democrats line, Silver Spring, Maryland. Good morning, Stone.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. I can only guess that this particular strategy that you mentioned with the generals will probably exacerbate this problem even further. I mean, you have a guy there, a young president, who probably only played a video game as far as any military strategies. He's no Jack Kennedy as well. And also, your last two mentions about McBundy and McNamara, you must understand, from my view, that these two men were probably at the last turns of their lives and felt so much guilt and shame that they had to reflect their own convictions in order to probably get through the final process of their lives. This is a disgrace. I know that the military experts, the strategies were done, but here we're going again with something that is probably more dangerous and lethal than anything we imagine, not only in cost, but to take leaks to the press to people like these glory grabbers like Woodward and all them. It just doesn't make sense.
All right, caller, we'll leave it there. Mr. Goldstein.
I would make 2 points. One is that in our system, we have a very clear designation of authority in the office of the commander-in-chief. The president is the commander-in-chief, and the president is the one alone who defines a strategy, who defines the objectives, and who defines the means applied to achieve those objectives. So there is something problematic about a general seeking to influence the outcome of a debate, however passionately he believes he has the right calculation.